Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. I want to welcome all of you who are watching us from all over the world, including those of you who are watching us on your phone on the portable TV app. We're glad you're there. Charles Dickens is known as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era. Why do I mention him right here at the start of this newscast? Because he is credited with coming up with this phrase. Are you ready? Adversity makes strange bedfellows. I want you to keep that quote in mind as I share with you what is happening right now between China and Iran, two countries presently being targeted economically and militarily by our government here in the United States. So here we go. This morning, the New York Times is penning a piece about a leak that describes how China and Iran are signing a 25-year military and economic partnership agreement. The piece, entitled "When China Met Iran," seems to suggest that Washington is kind of freaked out by this, that it has, quote, the United States in a geopolitical storm. So what is this deal between the U.S.'s biggest adversary in the Middle East and the U.S.'s most predominant economic competitor on the entire world stage? Well, it's described as an agreement that is going to provide Iran with all the tech and economic development that China can offer in exchange for massively discounted oil, all that Iran can offer. This is amazing, isn't it? So just how important is this deal? Is it happening because our foreign policy here in the States has literally pushed these two countries into each other's embrace? Has our adversarial relationship with each of them somehow ended up bringing them together, ironically? Charles Dickens, one of the world's greatest writers and social commentators of all time, if he were alive today, would probably say, if asked that question, that the answer is yes. Today, our focus is Iran. We are going to drill down on what's happening there, and we've invited Iran's ambassador to the United Nations to join us here live on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. Okay, these are the questions that we think you'll be asking tomorrow after watching our newscast today. What's Iran up to, both militarily and economically? Are the feds violating the U.S. Constitution in Portland? And will Ghislaine Maxwell's words now come back to haunt her? We've got coverage on all of those stories. We are moments away, though, from speaking with Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, right here, exclusively. But before we do so, we thought it would be good to set the table regarding Iran and all the news and accusations back and forth from Tehran to Washington. Here now is veteran Middle East correspondent Paula Sleer, who's covered Iran and can bring us up to date on what's going on there now. Paula, fill us in.
Well, Rick, over the past 3 weeks, there have been a series of explosions and fires across Iran. They've targeted a number of sites, including a nuclear power facility, a missile facility, a power plant, and a medical clinic. Now, there are a number of Iranian officials who suspect that sabotage is at play, and they've pointed fingers at both the Israelis and the Americans, particularly an attack recently at the Natanz nuclear facility is an attack that many say has the fingerprint of the Israelis all over it. Now, the Israelis are concerned that this attack could take the form of Iran mobilizing its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and to this end, they have increased, reportedly, the number of airstrikes over Syria in particular in recent weeks, targeting Iranian military infrastructure there. The Iranians have come to the aid of the Syrians and also the Iraqis in providing them with increased air defense systems to counter these Israeli airstrikes. There was a recent agreement that now sees 2 anti-aircraft missile defense systems deployed over Syria from Iran. So that will forever change the terms of engagement over the Syrian airspace. It's also allowed for a very formidable bubble of air defense to be created over Iraq. So what you have now is the Iranians joining an increasing number of countries that have air defense capability and air defense missiles deployed beyond their own borders.
Paula Sleer reporting to us on the very latest that's going on right now there in Iran. Thank you so much, Paula, for that report. We wanted Paula to try and set the table for what was going on as a bridge to what we're going to do now. Joining us now is Majid Takht Ravanchi. He is the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, and he's kind enough to spend some time with us talking about what's going on with his country right now. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Let's start with this. China. I mentioned that there is a deal in the works between your country and China, which seems extremely significant. I mentioned that part of the reason this is happening, many believe here in the States, is because you are both adversaries, much more so within the last 3.5 years, even than in the past. What can you tell us about this deal with China, sir?
Iran, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Iran and China are two great nations located in Asia. They have had good relations, traditional, historical relations, which go back to centuries. So it is natural for these two countries to get together, to discuss different issues, collaborate on many issues of interest to both sides, including in the field of economy. So the agreement between Iran and China is not something unusual. So we are in the process of finalizing a deal which affects both countries, which deals with many issues of interest for both sides, and I think it is natural for the two countries to sign such an agreement, provided that this is something necessary for two sides.
But let me ask you the question this way. Remember, most of our audience is in the United States, and here's what I think they would want to know. Do you feel like you are doing this deal with China because you can't do a deal with the United States, because the U.S., in essence, has pushed you away?
No, we are not. We are not interested to, to beg for anything from the United States. As I said, Iran and China are two natural friends. Both sides are interested in a strategic alliance, and that is what's happening on the ground. It is not related to the U.S. because, as I said, Iran and China have been enjoying good relations for many years.
But, Mr. Ambassador, we cannot minimize the horrible relations between the United States and Iran. It's as bad as I think it's ever been. How much of this do you think is your fault? What could you have done differently with the Trump administration to make the situation, the relationship, more amenable?
Just look at what has been happening in the last couple of years. Iran and a number of countries called P5+1 agreed on something which is called Iran Nuclear Deal, JCPOA. And it was signed by the United States along with other countries and Iran. But we see that when President Trump came to office, one of the subjects that he pursued to get rid of was the Iran nuclear deal, and this is exactly what happened in May 2018. So it is not Iran who left the negotiating table. It was the United States who left the negotiating table and imposed sanctions on Iran, which include in the area of food and medicine. The U.S. claims that food and medicine are exempt from sanctions, but it is not the case. Even today, food and medicine are being the target of the U.S. sanctions against the Iranian nation.
If indeed Mr. Biden becomes president of the United States, since he was the vice president while Obama was president when that nuclear deal was made, will you seek out the White House's guidance in reestablishing that nuke deal?
We have said that as soon as the U.S. gets back to the deal, act like a normal country who observes its international obligations. They can join the other members of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and have a normal discussions about the nuclear issue, as it was the case before President Trump decided to leave JCPOA.
Let me ask you some tough questions about the accusations that have been hurled against your country. Let's start with the tanker attacks in the Persian Gulf, which the United States and others, including the Brits, say they have evidence that you have done this. What would be your response to that, sir?
We have not seen any shred of evidence to be provided to Iran or to anybody else. These are accusations which have been rejected by Iran, and as I said, if they have any evidence, they should prove it to the whole international community, saying that Iran is the culprit, but they cannot provide such an information.
Prior to and even after the assassination of General Soleimani, the United States says that he personally, including your country as well, was fomenting terrorism in the region and were in fact responsible for many attacks that had taken place in places like Iraq. How do you respond to that charge, sir? Is your country indeed fomenting terrorism in the region?
Not at all. These are all accusations against Iran being leveled by the United States and a number of countries in the region and beyond. In fact, Iran is the main player in the fight against terrorism. Martyr Soleimani was the hero in the fight against terrorism, against Daesh and other terrorist organizations. So his assassination was a big gift to Daesh and others who celebrated his demise, because they knew how he was fighting them, and it was a big prize to these terrorist organizations. So we totally reject these allegations. In fact, the Prime Minister of Iraq is in Tehran now. He has had a number of good meetings with our officials in Tehran. Iran and Iraq have enjoyed traditional historical ties in different fields, and it is the United States who is trying to sow discord in the region, particularly between Iran and Iraq.
There are some reports that seem to indicate that Soleimani may have been trying to bring about a secret deal, a truce, if you will, with Saudi Arabia, which is no friend, at least diplomatically, to your country. Can you confirm or officially deny that?
What I can tell you is that we have always sought good relations with our neighbors. In fact, our neighbors are the priority for Iran's foreign policy. Last year, during the United Nations General Assembly, President Rouhani introduced an idea before the world body, and he initiated this Hormuz peace endeavor, which includes an architecture for the region, for the regional countries to get together to discuss different issues of interest, including in the field of economy, culture, and in many areas, and security. So, in fact, Iran is the country who is interested to have best of relations with our neighbors, including with our neighbors in the south. And in fact, it is the United States who does not want to see good relations being established between Iran and its neighbors.
I notice you didn't say anything about Israel. I have to ask you then, while we're down to 30 seconds, do you see any possibility that any time in the future your country will have a friendly relationship, or to be able to consider Israel an ally?
You know, we cannot establish relations with an entity which is occupying a nation, which is the source of instability in our region, which is being in the possession of more than 200 nuclear warheads. So Israel is the country who is responsible for all these wrongdoings in our region, for all these illegal, unlawful actions against the Palestinians and other countries in our neighborhood.
Majid Touch Ravanchi is the ambassador to the United Nations representing Iran. He is also the head negotiator for Iran during the nuclear talks with the United States. And we thank him very much so for taking time to join us here and take us through this. We hope to be able to have another conversation again soon, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
This is The News with Rick Sanchez. You're watching our special coverage. And when we come back, even more information, new information, we should say, about Ghislaine Maxwell and how her own words may be coming back to haunt her. We'll be back. Protests and clashes with federal agents continued last night in Portland, Oregon, but the conversation has shifted toward what the federal government's role should be in this type of situation. The questions are numerous. Should the White House trump state and local efforts to deal with this issue? Should they be there uninvited? And should they be there in unmarked cars and without any identification on their uniforms, explaining who they work for, what their jurisdiction is? These are the questions that are being asked as the violence continues. For more on the very latest here, we go to RT's Alex Mihailovich.
People power was on display once again in Portland, Oregon. The ongoing rallies, like many around the U.S., have attracted thousands of protesters since the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police this past May. However, the demonstrations against police brutality and systematic racism in the U.S. have also seen their share of violence in Portland, and some say the situation has been exacerbated by the arrival of federal agents. The Trump administration dispatched the officers who showed up in unmarked cars, dressed in military-style gear, without any forms of identification to be seen. The federal agents have used stun grenades and tear gas against the protesters. There are also reports of citizens being taken by the officers without warrant, along with demands from the city of Portland and the state of Oregon for the agents to be removed immediately. Demonstrators antagonized the federal officers, crowding in front of a federal courthouse and Portland's Justice Center late Monday night. Explosions were heard, and smoke could be seen rising at the site, making the protests look more like a war zone. This situation does not seem to be deterring President Trump. He's threatening to expand the use of federal agents to other cities.
Well, I'm going to do something that I can tell you, because we're not going to let New York and Chicago and Philadelphia and Detroit and Baltimore and all of these, Oakland is a mess. We're not going to let this happen in our country, all run by liberal Democrats.
The mayor of Chicago has responded to the president's threat.
I have great concerns about that, particularly given the track record in the city of Portland. We don't need federal agents without any insignia taking people off the street and holding them, I think, unlawfully. That's not what we need.
On the streets and in the halls of government, the U.S. appears to be deeply divided. And with local and state governments going head-to-head with the Oval Office, some say a constitutional crisis is on the horizon. For News with Rick Sanchez, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Good stuff, Alex. Thanks so much. There is a new wrinkle in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell. The testimony she gave 4 years ago is suddenly coming back to haunt her. This as she fears for her life and says that she is convinced that Epstein was murdered. For more on this, here is RT's John Huddy.
She said it herself. During a 2016 deposition, Ghislaine Maxwell said a very small part of her job working for Jeffrey Epstein was, quote, from time to find adult professional massage therapists for Jeffrey. But it went beyond that, according to federal prosecutors. The 18-page federal indictment against Maxwell alleges she recruited victims as young as 14 to give Epstein sexual massages and later to be sexually abused and trafficked by both he and Maxwell. Maxwell is also charged with perjury, counts 5 and 6 of the indictment, alleging that Maxwell during the deposition knowingly made false material declarations, including that she wasn't, quote, aware that he, Epstein, was having sexual activities with anyone when I was with him other than myself, along with Maxwell saying she had never given anyone a massage, including Epstein or any of the victims, including those who were minors at the time. Well, the numerous victims who have come forward say she's a liar including Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who filed a defamation lawsuit against Maxwell in which she calls Giuffre a liar during that same 2016 deposition, 40 pages of which an appeals court unsealed last August. And speaking of liars, the Daily Mail reports that Maxwell paid $25,000 to fake news purveyor Jacob Wall to, quote, smear Epstein victims and to get prosecutor Jeffrey Berman fired in an attempt to stall the sex trafficking investigation against her. Wall and his shady lobbyist colleague Jack Berman have been accused of hiring paid actors to level disgusting and wild accusations against various politicians, including Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren. Wall, whose father is the criminal defense attorney David Wall, a frequent Fox News guest, has also been accused of financial fraud. The Daily Mail reports that a former model was hired by the two men to be used for the smear plot on behalf of Maxwell. RT could not independently verify the Daily Mail's reporting, but Miami Herald reporter Julie K. Brown, whose own reporting helped lead to the criminal indictment and arrest of Epstein last year, tweeted this about the Daily Mail exclusive. If this is true, it shows that Ghislaine Maxwell is using Jeffrey Epstein's playbook to corrupt the U.S. criminal justice system almost the same way Epstein did. I hope someone is investigating because questions need to be asked. One question being asked, could the Daily Mail story about Maxwell be more fake news peddled by Jacob Wall for publicity? The sleazy and twisted world of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein taking even more twists and turns. For the news with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
And joining us now is Lionel of Lionel Media. Boy, there's so much to unpack here. The big news item in the last 24 hours has been the fact that, A, she says she thinks she's going to be murdered or fears it. She's convinced that Epstein himself was murdered. A man identifying himself or identifying as her husband has suddenly come out of nowhere. A federal judge yesterday was apparently attacked in her home, and it turns out that she was the judge that was dealing with the bank that was tied to Jeffrey Epstein. My God, Lionel, where do you start? Where do we start with this?
Let's talk about the surreal world of this first. If you would have told me that the federal government actually charged a notorious sex trafficker with perjury on a defamation deposition, I would have said, no. You don't do that. Rick, if we went after perjury, I'm sorry to say this, lying, there would be a 24/7 separate court for perjury. The idea of this, she's looking at maybe 35 years tops in this. Nobody even understands that. Number two, this is a woman who the other day you mentioned the husband to be. She's lying. She's trying to get out of prison, out of jail, to post bail, and she's lying about whether she's married. Won't tell the jail officials who he is. She might be able to use some type of a spousal immunity claim maybe later on. That's it. The thing that nobody can figure out also is, where is she? Now, I don't want to be conspiracy-minded, God forbid, but if you told me she's nowhere near, she's not even in this country, I wouldn't be surprised. Rick, she is the top, the number one linchpin in something that could bring down not something that is bigger than you or I could even imagine. And they're charging it with perjury? That's the least of our issues. So none of this case makes any sense at all. And don't forget, Bill Barr one time said in an interview, I think Epstein committed suicide. He's the only one. So everywhere, this case doesn't make any sense.
So, by the way, just based on what you just asked, I just did a quick Google search. This is well-placed sources are saying she was arrested in New Hampshire. She was taken into custody in Brooklyn at the MDC, Metropolitan Department of Corrections. And then she was taken into custody by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and I guess is somewhere in New York. That's your.
She was in Brooklyn. They said she was in Brooklyn. But Rick, remember the story where she said she was in New Hampshire?
Right.
And they came to her man at 8 o'clock. Hello. She was smartly attired, reading a book. She doesn't get the Roger Stone 4 a.m. ninja call. I mean, none of this made any sense. Have you ever heard of the FBI ever storming a compound at 8 a.m.? And the idea, put it this way, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
If you're afraid for your life, The last place you're going to be is in the middle of the woods, where you could be hit by drone attack or God knows
so what are you saying?
In a mansion with big windows.
Are you saying that you're, it sounds like you're skeptical about her arrest, and you seem to be implying that she's kind of calling the shots here and not being treated the way others have been treated in the past?
Remember in the old days when Al Capone sometimes would get arrested just to make it look good? Mm-hmm. Remember those stories? I'm saying, Rick, something is rotten in Denmark. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. I wouldn't be surprised if this is nothing but a charade, as they say, to get to the bigger fish.
All right. You know, in Hialeah, they say charade.
As well they should.
My friend Lionel, thank you so much. Interesting conversation,
Thank you,
a story that just keeps on giving. Meanwhile, we're going to be following several other stories throughout the day to bring you the latest. There's also a big development in the sports world. We'll have that for you as well. I'm Rick Sanchez. See you when it's time, as we like to say, to do news again.